everyone for joining us today. We're going to give our viewers a few minutes to join, and while we're waiting, I'm going to play a piano tune, just joking. I'm going to tell you actually about the Interaction Design Foundation, and before I introduce today's masterclass with our speakers, Ariel and Joanne Eckstedt. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome, warm welcome to you all. And if you're returning and have attended a previous webinar from the Interaction Design Foundation, thanks and welcome back. IXDF is the world's largest online design school with over 100,000 graduates now. And since 2002, we've been market leaders in design education because the world's best design experts produce our courses and literature. And I'm one of them, by the way. I'm Frank Spillers. I teach some courses. I'm an instructor on the Interaction Design Foundation and CEO of a UX consulting firm called Experience Dynamics. So back to IXDF. IXDF is the home of the largest global network of design professionals. You can find free IXDF meetups, which are kind of local groups in your city or area. And right now there are 470 cities that have local meetups for, it's like an IXDF, local chapter. So along with a wide range of advanced courses, IXDF also offers masterclass webinars such as this one that you're attending here today, or if you're viewing the recording, thanks for tuning into the recording. And these classes let you learn directly from design leaders, such as our speakers that we're going to hear from today. So a little bit about the masterclass webinar format. Today's webinar also includes a Q&A, question and answer session with Joanne and Ariel at the end. So please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A button in the Zoom interface. The interface is available to viewers who are using the Zoom client, by the way. And to answer one of our most commonly asked questions, the webinar will be recorded and you will receive the recording link a few hours after the broadcast ends. So look out for that and you can use it to review and refresh again. So let me tell you about today's webinar. Today's masterclass webinar is on the topic of color theory and how to use color to enhance your designs. Color is such an intrinsic part of our lives, and if you're in the design or a design-related background, it's probably even more important to you, such as if you're a visual designer or graphic designer. So when it comes to color choices, we don't always consider the impact the colors we choose have, because color is such a significant part of the human experience, though, and it has cultural cues in it, and our moods and thoughts are affected by it. It's something that's important to understand. The effect that it can have on your customers is also very important, as branding people have known for a very long time, we should add. So in today's webinar, Joanne and Ariel are going to take on a journey through the origins and the fundamentals of color. You'll learn color basics like how color manifests and how it's affected and how it how in turn it affects other people who look at it or perceive it. Joanne and Ariel are going to show us the building blocks of color theory and the essentials for how designers can integrate these across disciplines. So yeah, this webinar or masterclass is going to go beyond UX. It's kind of relevant for anyone that's interested in design in general. I think these days, because visual design is so close to UX, it's an important topic to dig into because of that. Now you'll see on the screen there in front of you our speakers. I'd like to introduce you to our experts, Joanne Eckstedt and Ariel. Joanne is a leading color consultant and interior designer. She's the founder of The Roomworks, which is a prominent New York City interior design firm. Joanne is one of 12 designers chosen by the Color Association of the United States to create the yearly interior or environmental forecast that's used by major industries to keep up with color trends. So definitely an expert in color. Ariel is a co-founder of the Book Doctors and the author of 10 other books. Wow, you've been busy, Ariel. She speaks and writes about the science, history, and culture of color and is regularly interviewed on this subject. She's appeared on NPR's All Things Considered show, Time Magazine, and Business Insider, to name a few. Together, Ariel and Joanne are the authors of the authoritative Secret Language of Color, it's the name of the book, and co-authors of What is Color? 50 Questions and Answers on the Science of Color. Without further ado, I now want to hand over our virtual stage to Joanne and Ariel to bring some color into this discussion. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Frank. And we are very excited to be here for this masterclass today. And for those of you who have not guessed, we are mother and daughter.
And I think we're very well prepared today for the class because I checked with Ariel very early this morning to make sure that we did not end up wearing the same color, which often happens.
It does, it's embarrassing. We go somewhere and we're wearing often even the same thing.
Without consulting each other.
We also wanted to honor St. Patty's Day. So my mom is wearing green. Happy St. Patty's Day, everybody.
Indeed.
And are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right,
Okay.
let's go.
So we have been students of color for decades now. And when we set out to write our first book, we thought we were color experts.
But we soon learned that anybody who calls themselves a color expert is actually a liar.
A true expert would have to be fluent in physics,
Chemistry,
astronomy,
optics,
neuroscience,
geology,
botany,
zoology,
human biology,
linguistics,
sociology,
anthropology,
art history,
cartography, and that's just to name a very few of the things you'd have a deep knowledge of.
Now we've written 2 books on color, but we still can't call ourselves experts, but we've learned an immense amount along the way.
So we're just going to start by sharing some fun facts that give a sense of the breadth of color and start to answer the question, what is color?
So when a bull sees red, in other words, the bull is angry, the bull is actually not seeing red at all because bulls are colorblind.
If you took a certain pill of a certain color for a year, and then the manufacturer changed the color of that pill, there's a 50% chance that you would stop taking the pill, even if it was necessary for your health.
Flamingos get their beautiful color from the food they eat, including shrimp. And without food that is itself salmon in color, they would fade to white.
In 1856, a chemist named William Perkin made a mistake that changed the world forever. In an experiment that went awry, he ended up with some pinkish, purplish, brownish sludge. And curious, he dipped fabric into this sludge and found that not only did the color take, but it lasted.
At this time, natural dyes were the only option, and they were expensive to create, and they were prone to fading. Perkin knew he was onto something, and he set out on a project of creating this new dye that he called mauve, and he produced it in large quantities. Before long, chemists all over Europe were using aniline to produce these dyes. And in a few decades, over 2,000 synthetic dyes, including magenta, were available. And they have now taken the place of comparably few and expensive natural dyes that were really hard to reproduce and had been there for centuries.
And the fabric in the slide is an actual sample from Perkins dye. And all the colors that we use today in everything that you see around us, with a very few exceptions, are based on Perkin. So let me. So these and hundreds of other interesting facts led us more deeply into the science of color, which I'm now going to delve into, and then my mom is going to pick back up in the second half of our presentation to talk about how to apply these principles to design. So I'm going to start with a twist on an age-old question that gets to the heart of the science of color. And here it goes. When fall foliage happens in the middle of a forest and no one is there to see it, did the leaves still change color? So I'm going to let you think about that for 1 second. Now, if you're a new student of color, your answer is probably a resounding duh. Of course, the leaves change color because the color is inherent in the leaves. But here's the astonishing thing. The color is not inherent in the leaves. Color does not exist until we see them in. There's no such thing as color without our eyes and our brain. And the truth is that most other animals and even some humans don't see the red, orange, yellow, green leaves. They may see other colors entirely, completely different colors. And this is because different brains process different visual information. And this idea that color does not exist outside of our perception is difficult to swallow because it counters what appears to be cold, hard reality. And what exactly are these colors that we see then? We can't talk about color without talking about light. And without light, there is no color. But the relationship between light and color is often baffling and counterintuitive. And light is a physical entity in the universe, and color is constructed by a brain. And the colors that are actually perceived depend on whose brain is constructing them. So let me share my screen here. The process of light turning into color can be broken down broadly into 4 steps. So first, there's a spectrum of light emitted from a source, whether it be the sun, a fluorescent bulb, an LED bulb, fire, whatever. Second, that light strikes an object, a material or a surface. Some of this light is absorbed by the object and some of it is reflected, usually in the form of multiple wavelengths of light. So if we look at this VW bug here and we see perhaps sunlight hitting the bug, the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet light hits the bug, but only the blue and violet light is reflected, and that is what we see. So third, some of these wavelengths of light will be detected by our visual system. Fourth, the mechanics of our particular brains determine which colors we actually perceive, a process that goes beyond the physical nature of these wavelengths. So if we change the light source, we also change what we see. If you change an incandescent bulb to an LED bulb and you change which light gets absorbed and which light gets reflected. So here we have a series of photos of the exact same M&Ms. On the left, we have M&Ms that are in sunlight. And you can see red, orange, yellow, green, and blue M&Ms. When you get to the middle slide, these M&Ms are only in red and green light. We're not going to dial down right now into why red and green light makes yellow light But for those of you who work on computers or have ever worked in theater, you know this to be the case. So here they are only in red, yellow, and green light, the yellow being the combination of the red and green. And as you can see, we no longer see blue M&Ms. The blue goes away. Lastly, we have M&Ms that are lit only by a yellow laser, only yellow light on these M&Ms. And in contrast to the other two, they look kind of brown and white, but if you isolate them on a white page, you'll see the yellow. So these look completely monochromatic. They just go from light yellow to dark brown. So human brains have gone to extraordinary lengths to give us color vision. And for millions of years, we have used color to map out life on our planet. Our world is color coded so that we know when to stop and when to go, what subway line to take, what to reach for in the water cooler in a supermarket. And color vision is key to distinguishing one thing from another to better navigate our world. In addition to being able to distinguish the color of an object, also clues us in to the internal state of that object. So what I mean by that, if you look at these tomatoes, you can tell which one is ripe by the color. Or if you look at a child's flushed skin, you might be able to tell that they have a fever. Color also influences and gives information about what's going on around us. So if you wear the wrong jersey to a sporting event, you may find yourself in the wrong end zone. Or if you don't wear an orange safety vest, while hunting, there's a chance that you might get shot. So color can be extremely important. So along with shape, texture, movement, darkness, or lightness, the more colors we see, the more information we can interpret in the light-filled world around us. If you're presented with two bowls of guacamole, and one is bright green and one is a really pukey brown, you know which bowl to eat. And it saves you from getting sick or even going to the ER potentially. If you drive down the road and you come to a stoplight, what do? If you could only see shades of gray, it would take longer to know whether you should stop, go, or slow down. And our world all over is mapped out by color, and it prevents everything from major car accidents to simple things like getting on the wrong subway. We can potentially see millions of colors when laid out sequentially in front of us, like in this Farnsworth color vision test, which asks people to take these tiny little round pieces and line them up according to wavelength. And if you have perfect color vision like my mother, you get the test 100% right, which she did. But if you're presented with colors non-sequentially, then it can be much harder. So right now I'm showing you two reds. At the end of this presentation, we're going to show you one of them. See if you can remember which red it is, the red on the right or the red on the left, when we get to the end of the presentation. We're going to have a little poll then so that you can see how your color vision is. So people have spent millennia trying to contain, organize, and formulate systems in order to understand this gift of color vision. All you have to do is look at these incredible color wheels and the different ways that they're organized, for example, to see what we mean. We're often taught that these containers and categorizations and systems are some form of natural law, but really they're just human inventions meant to impose order on the inorderable. And just as we have invented intervals of time so we know when to show up somewhere, musical scales and notes so that we can compose symphonies. We've also invented the colors of the rainbow in order to measure the infinite. For example, for those of you who were taught the mnemonic Roy-G Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, this came out of Sir Isaac Newton's experiment, where he discovered that white light could be divided into a rainbow of colors via a prism. But this mnemonic is completely arbitrary. We are taught that all shades come from these colors, but this is incorrect. There's nothing about these hues that are fundamental. In fact, we no longer even consider indigo a fundamental hue at all. Kids today are just taught red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. So Newton himself picked these 7 colors because he wanted them to mirror the 7 tones of the musical scale. He started with 11 colors and he whittled them down to 7, but he just as easily could have chosen 9, 15, 22, because if you look at these 2 images here, you can see that where he put dividing lines is just random. The ways in which we talk about the psychology of color also fall into the category of human invention, if not fake news. And unfortunately, there is very little research about how the brain actually responds to color. Most color psychology, quote unquote, facts are not based in science. And to understand our responses to color, it's crucial to look at 3 different ways color affects our psychology. The first is our biological response. And we do know a bit about how we respond biologically, for example, to red objects. They inspire fear and sexual desire in scientific studies that have been done. We also know some things about how we respond biologically to blue light. It can help us with everything from seasonal affective disorder to issues with our internal clocks to problems with concentration. The second is our cultural response. For example, in the West, blue is by far and away the favorite color and yellow the least favorite color. But if you move to the East, yellow climbs to the top of the charts. And these differences have to do with different cultural associations with various colors. And the third is our personal association with color. So if you happen to have gone to prison and were put in a pink cell, you probably have a pretty negative association with pink. But if you had one of your best nights of your life in this beautiful pink restaurant, you probably have a very positive association. So don't be fooled by claims like peach increases the appetite or green calms you or yellow uplifts you. These might be true for some people whose personal, cultural, and biological responses line up to support these claims, but test a different group of people across the globe or even in the same family, and you might find completely different results. It's not to say that color doesn't affect people. It, of course, affects people, and often the same color can affect people all at once. For example, if you put a group of people in a fluorescent yellow room with yellow floors, walls, and ceilings, I'm sure that group of people is going to feel something. But whether everyone in the room feels the same thing for the same reasons is at this point very hard to prove. Which gets us to the dress. I'm sure many of you remember this image of the dress, which went viral. Because different people saw different things. Some people saw a blue and black dress, and some people saw a white and gold dress. And all you have to do is look at the image to see how complicated and elusive color really is. So you know that first question that I asked, in the fall, do the leaves change color if no one is there to see them? So just like color isn't inherent in those leaves, it also is not inherent in the dress. The dress is simply an object made out of a particular material, and when viewed in a particular light, absorbs certain light and reflects other light. And depending on whose eyes and brain are observing the dress, the light illuminating it and what surrounds the dress, it might appear as white and cold, or blue and black, or something else entirely. If the person or observer is colorblind, or if the observer is a bird, a bee, or a dog. Which gets us to these two flowers. So these are the same flower, and humans with normal color vision see the color on the left. The flower on the right is adjusted to so that we can get an approximation of what a bee sees, but the approximation is put within the spectrum of what we can see. So bees can see ultraviolet light, which we cannot. So when this is adjusted and you look at the middle of the flower on the left, it looks basically all white to us. The middle of the flower on the right looks like two completely distinct colors. So you can see how different what we see is depending on what our brains can do. And in the reverse direction, here's a geranium. On the left is what humans with normal color vision see. And on the right is what a dog sees. So dogs do not see red like bulls. And therefore, this is what a geranium appears to a dog. Oops, went too far.
Indeed.
So through, I'm going to just stop for 1 second there. Through the ages, scientists, artists, and philosophers alike have debated this question, what is color? And the answer is we still don't know. While scientists have been hacking away at the physics and chemistry of color for centuries now, the science of vision is still in its infancy. And what we do now understand is that color is not simply quantifiable, even if light is. It's almost impossible to believe that what we see is an objective reality. But like taste, where an olive may seem sour to one person and bitter to another, we just don't quite know what red is to someone else or to another being. And while we still know so little about color, just by mastering what we know so far can help us use color to far greater effect, whether it be in art, design, fashion, marketing, or any other human pursuit. And that's where my mom is now going to take us to discuss how to actually use color with this science in mind.
Indeed. So I believe that color is the backbone of design. Whether you're designing interior, a website, or a book, color comes into play in every design decision. Yet too often, color is neglected, misused, and actually misunderstood. Even many trained designers are intimidated by the complicated nature of color, and they are not aware of the basic concepts necessary to use it wisely. I want to introduce to you two defining principles to guide you in creating a visual environment with color. These two principles are, number one, color is transitory, and number two, context is key. Number one, daylight is constantly changing, so the colors we see change constantly as well. Although we don't necessarily realize it, millions of changes in light happen throughout the day. Here, It is beautifully illustrated in this time-lapse image of the Statue of Liberty, which takes place just as the sun is setting. You can see that even in a short period of time, there are myriad changes. We could be overwhelmed by this information about constantly changing light, but our brains help us to hold steady. So, for example, when viewing the red house in this photo, the human brain has no difficulty in seeing it as entirely one red, even though the side in the sun looks coral and the side in the shade looks maroon. When you isolate the colors and place them side by side, as in the two swatches you see here, the coral and the maroon are in no way the same, and neither look like the same red we see when we view the house. Number 2, changing a light source changes what colors we see. When we change the light source, the elements in the space will reflect different wavelengths of light, causing the space and the objects in it to change their color appearance. For example, daylight emits light evenly across the spectrum, so no particular color is emphasized, while incandescent light emphasizes reds, oranges, and yellows. So objects that are lit in this way tend to echo those tones. Fluorescents have an uneven pattern of emission, giving objects a green or a yellow-green kind of a cast. And LEDs, since they're weak in violet and blue violet and red areas, are strong and peak in the orange, yellow, and green range. In the example that we see here, the pencils on the left are lit with incandescent light and show the red as enhanced and the natural wood on the pencils as pinker. The pencils in the middle in LED light slightly neutralize all the colored pencils, and the wood appears to be a kind of a beige. And the pencils on the right in the fluorescent light show the colors as more muted generally, and the wood appears to be a light brown. So the source of the light determines the way colors are perceived. Number 3, colors appear to change depending on what colors surround them. This phenomenon is called simultaneous contrast. Color isn't constructed solely via particular wavelengths of light that we just discussed in number 2, but by a larger visual field. Simultaneous contrast can make a color look more saturated, duller, darker, lighter, or some combination thereof, depending on what color it sits next to. In the examples that you see here, all of the X's are printed in the same color, although they appear to change color as they're paired with different backgrounds. In the second example, the turquoise blue in the circle on the left and the bright lime green in the circle on the right are actually the exact same color. I know this seems impossible at first glance, but I assure you this is true. They appear to be completely distinct colors only because the colors they sit next to are different. Colors, number 4, colors that appear to match in one setting do not in another. Two materials can appear to be the same matching color under particular lighting, but they no longer match when moved to a different light source. This is called metamerism. For example, a blue carpet and a blue fabric swatch, as seen in this illustration, may look the same when observed in a showroom lit with bulbs that are keyed to match natural daylight. However, inside a room lit with incandescent bulbs that reflect more red, the carpet may appear to have a more purple cast and no longer match the upholstery fabric as it did in the showroom. This is the bane of every designer's existence. Color appearing one way in the showroom, another in the space where it will be used. So designers, beware. This is due to the different molecular properties of the dye, say a pigment dye versus a vat dye, and the different molecular properties of the fibers, say a wool versus a nylon. Seeing how color can change in both subtle and drastic ways, the next principle, as I said before, is that context is the key. In fact, without context, our color vision doesn't work. We fail to see color at all without something that falls outside the edges to compare it to. Even the most intense color will fade to gray if you block out the colors that surround it. Try it now and you'll see. Just take a piece of white paper and roll it into a tube. Find a surface or a piece of paper with a solid bright block of color. Then place one end of the tube about an inch above the surface. Put your eye up to the top of the tube so you can't see anything else except the patch of color at the bottom. Stare at the patch of color for 1 to 2 minutes and watch the color disappear. Disappear. This is how important context is.
But don't do it right now because then you're not going to see the slides. So you have to wait till we're done.
That's right. Okay. So to choose colors that stand out, fade away, help give direction, define a brand, and more, the context in which they will be seen is of utmost importance. For me, as an interior designer and a colors and materials expert, context means looking around. Everything that surrounds what I am designing influences what the viewer will see color-wise. When specifying a color palette for a building facade, for example, first, I do a site analysis that includes the significant colors within the local area. Then I survey the existing housing stock or other neighborhood buildings, and I note all the materials. Next, I bring into consideration all the changing color elements of the natural landscape, like lighting, vegetation, waterways, and sky. And last, I find the various accent colors that are within the architecture or immediate surroundings that were selected at random, like signage, awnings, and say geraniums on a windowsill. Then I mock up multiple images of the facade I will be working with, and I create a series of color palettes based on what has been collected to help sort out the best options for creating my color palette. This image by the French colorist Jean-Philippe Lanclos is a beautiful example of how to experiment and shows how the same color can look so different depending on what other colors it is next to. The transitory nature of color, combined with the context in which you are using it, applies to all fields of design, including interaction, experiential, graphic, print, and interior. For example, if you're choosing a logo color for an app, then this logo color will appear as an icon on phones in the presence of other apps. When I look down at my phone's home screen, my Facebook, App Store, Mail, Zillow, Zoom, FakeSpot, and weather apps are all almost the exact same blue, making it harder to differentiate between these at a quick glance. My Waze app is also blue, but it's significantly lighter and slightly greener, making it very easy to spot. So if you want to confuse the user so that they hit your app instead of Facebook, great. But if you want to differentiate your company altogether, you're going to want to choose a color with enough contrast to spot it easily. Knowing that colors change depending on what's around them, and knowing that context is key is all great conceptually, but designers also want to know, how do I choose the right colors? I am a firm believer that there are no such things as right colors. There is always more than one way to apply color successfully. but I do believe in asking a series of questions before choosing a palette. Number one, most importantly, do you need to incorporate existing colors? Or are you starting from scratch? Look at what's already there. Are you working with a company that already has a turquoise logo like Waze, for example? That doesn't mean that a brochure you design has to match the turquoise, but it helps if your palette relates to the logo if they're going to sit on the same page. You also should consider the context of the overall style of what's already in place. Is the emphasis, for example, on darker, more conservative colors or bright and festive ones? Number two, what colors does your client love? What colors do you or the person or the company you're working with gravitate to? Does your client at Fresh Direct love the color green, but you're presenting them with oranges and reds? You're going to get a happier client. Personally, they like the colors. If they personally like them. If not, it might not be so good. Getting a feel for their personal palette can be the key to success. And it can be as easy as putting a paint deck in front of someone and asking them to point to colors that they find appealing. Number three, what is the overall effect you're trying to create? Do you want a color scheme that shouts, "Here I am," or do you want something that whispers softly? It's not just the hue that you choose that evokes a particular feeling, but it's the chroma, meaning the intensity, and the value, how light or dark a color is as well. Intense colors emphasize objects that they cover, and they're flashy. Dark, warm colors have a way of drawing things together and are intimate. Light, cool colors have a way of opening things up and making them more expansive, especially if they're in a similar hue and value. In the case of the Washington Post app, the deep blue connotes a seriousness and authority that matches with their mission. Number four, the effect of color on scale. Are you trying to make a room look smaller, bigger, taller, or shorter? I use color to adjust any deficiencies in the scale of a particular space. If I'm painting a room with an uncomfortably low ceiling, a lighter color on the ceiling than on the walls will make the room appear taller, as you can see on the slide on the left. If I'm painting a room with uncomfortably high ceilings, a darker color on the ceiling than on the walls will make a room appear lower, as you can see in the slide in the middle. If you want to make a room feel less long and narrow, I would put an accent color on the end wall, as in the slide on the right. The following slides illustrate how changing the paint colors can drastically change the scale and the feeling of a room. We're flipping through these now just so you can get a quick sense of how this works. And last, on exterior facades, you can also see how color is used to emphasize either architectural details like windows and trim, or on the building form itself. In the left slide, the first and second houses are done in varying forms of a monochromatic scheme. That is the sort of maroon and dark blue. Whereas the houses further down with the green and tan and the red and tan emphasize architectural details. In the slide on the right, the details like window trim and doors are emphasized in the gray and yellow houses, while the architectural form of the building is emphasized in the charcoal gray house further down to the right. Number five, are you looking for colors that are contrasting or harmonious? Once you have chosen your dominant hue, then you need to decide which color scheme you prefer. Monochromatic schemes, where you're using shades of the same color, give the greatest sense of harmony. Complementary schemes that use highly contrasting colors that sit opposite each other on the color wheel can be anywhere from exciting to jarring. And then there's everything in between the two ends of the bell curve. In this last side, there is what is called an analogous color scheme, where you can see the similar greens. And in the green on the left, it's used with a color yellow, which is next to green on one side of the color wheel. And in the right slide, it's green with the blue, which is next to it on the other side in the color wheel. Number 6. Why a neutral in every palette? First, let me give you a definition of neutrals. Neutrals are created by mixing a hue and its complement together in varying proportions. This muddies or grays down the original hue. Neutrals help to bring other color choices together by creating a place for the eye to rest, and they work as excellent backgrounds for more intense accents. In this slide, on the left, you can see that the neutral is used as the background color, and on the right, the neutral is used as an accent. In the next slide, you can see how the pale gray neutral acts as a background for intense accents.
And I just want to add that this slide is the design of my mom's. It's a loft in Soho with some really wonderful color combinations.
So with all the information from this masterclass under your belt, we hope your design intelligence takes a leap and makes you better at your craft.
And we hope that you've enjoyed this whirlwind tour of color and how to use it. And now I'm going to ask you to try and remember those 2 red squares. And Sunandita, if you want to put up the poll now to ask people, is this red square that you're seeing the square that was on the left or the square that was on the right? So while people are choosing, I'll just add that you can find out a lot more information about the science, the culture, the history of color, etc., in both of our books, which Frank mentioned at the beginning. One is called The Secret Language of Color, and the other is What is Color? 50 Questions and Answers on the Science of Color. All right, do we have an answer on our poll? On the right.
Wow.
Okay. So
good job.
this is really good. We can tell that this is a group of designers because you are correct. It was the color on the right.
Good job.
That is awesome. All right.
For the record, the right side was my.
Oh, okay. Well,
okay.
There might also, men's color vision is slightly not quite as good as women's in general.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So lastly, we're just going to end with one last thing, which is our very favorite quote about color, which says it all. You ready?
Color is a pigment of our imagination.
So thank you all. And we will now take some questions and stop sharing the screen.
I love a good pun.
Yes,
exactly. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
Thank you. That was, wow. That was fantastic. Really, really, really great. I loved how you mentioned context. It's so important, context. In interaction design with digital experiences, the context is like a call to action or an area that you want a user to see, and so we play with contrast and bright colors and making things pop, in order to help with the interaction. In service design, which is another area of design here, and there's a class that I teach on it for Interaction Design Foundation. They actually shared something a few days ago, I think it was, on if you're not connected on LinkedIn to Interaction Design Foundation, you should do that. There's some good shares and stuff. Some of you maybe already saw this, and I wish I could share my screen, but basically it was a shopping basket. One said, I would like to be assisted, and all the baskets are in red. And the other sign said, I would like to shop on my own, and the baskets are in like gray. And it's sort of like so very interesting. Not only is the color you're selecting like bother me or help me in advance. So now we have a social dimension that you're basically non-verbally telling the clerk in the store to like, leave me alone. I'm just here.
Right.
Isn't that amazing?
That is genius.
That's wonderful.
It's cool. Yeah. And it's,
Great example. We'll use it going forward.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We got to add that in.
Yes.
I'll send you this. Yeah, it was on the Interaction Design Foundation's LinkedIn post just a few days ago, actually.
Yeah.
If you're watching this later and recording it, you might try Googling it, or because there's no way to find stuff in these systems. But that's the topic of another masterclass.
It is.
You did mention time, and you did mention culture, and we have some great questions from the audience. So let's go to Fred asked a question, but you did answer it, and it was, when creating a color palette for a new project, where do you start? And you said, find out what your client likes, like that mood board idea, right? Which is where a lot of designers start. Do you have anything to add to, because you gave some specific advice already about that, but do you want to add anything to that?
Well, on top of the mood board, that is all talking about context. And then there's the conceptual part, which I actually talked about later. And you need to find out, what is the aim? What are you trying to show your user? How do you want your user to feel? Mm-hmm. So you need to have sort of the emotional parameters, and you need to write those out, and then you need to talk to the client about how to develop those, because you can do that with color.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right.
and
So that's wonderful. So it's like color discussion as a business conversation in terms of objectives and priorities and goals and context of what the user or customer is trying to achieve or wants to.
For instance, if you want something exciting, you might use brighter colors. Whereas if you're advertising a spa, and you want this tranquil environment, it's going to look very different.
I mean, even Frank, the example you just gave is so perfect. It's not a palette per se, but it's like, I want help. I'm here with the red basket. Leave me alone. Gray, fade into the background. So those kinds of things. Now, in terms of a palette, I come from the publishing business. And so whenever I'm working on a book, the first thing I do is I actually go to a bookstore and I see the shelf where my book is going to sit. And often there's certain color palettes that people tend to use for different subject matters, like business books have a lot of blue in them, or green for money, or what have you. So you want a combination of something that's actually going to stand out so people can see the spine when they walk past it. But at the same time, certain things do have associations. Like if you're writing a finance book and it's red, in the red
is not a good association.
Not where you want to be, unless it's, about bankruptcy or something like that.
That could be.
Yeah. One thing you didn't touch too much on, but you kind of alluded to, and I know it was a question from somebody, and I think it was related to culturally sensitive or cross-culture, what we call really localization or cross-culture design. So if we're designing for Brazil or for Kenya or for India versus Italy or Canada or New Zealand or something like that, and then let me actually add, so I guess that's kind of a comment on that, on cross-culture. Ali asks, where can we find inspiration for colors to use? Where do you find it?
Oh, well, I find inspiration most prominently in nature. I have to say, I walk my dog every day, and I'm looking around at the incredible palettes. I have one here from yesterday. I don't know how clearly you can see that. It's a hellebore.
I'm going to take it out and see. So there's like pale pinks and
Wow.
dull greens, and then the stem is kind of maroon.
Right, right.
And it's like, oh my gosh, like my mom picked this. She was like, oh, what a right
Yeah, it
there.
was so exquisite. But I also love art and fashion. But the other thing I would say to everyone who's a designer is take photos, snap, snap, snap. I go out, I see crumbling paint on a building,
Mhm.
or I see a beautiful cat with unusual coloring.
Right.
Snap, snap, snap. Those are all fantastic inspiration. Whatever strikes you, save it because you will use it sometime.
And the cultural piece is really gets down to research, that making the assumption that where you're from and what you like is what someone else is going to like as well, is problematic in every way, not
Mhm.
just when it comes to color palettes. So
Yeah.
using
Yeah.
the sensitivity, and having the interest in what another culture values is so essential to good design.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, definitely, definitely. That there's I probably shouldn't say this, but there's a course that's being produced right now that's going to be on the Interaction Design Foundation that I created with my partner. And we went to Japan, and right now in Japan is the season of sakura, the blossom, the
Blossom,
Yeah.
the cherry
so
blossom.
all of a sudden you start seeing pink in all the marketing, and like
Mhm.
everything is pink. So there are these like theme periods in a culture that it's expected that you advertise in that color. If you're a brand, even selling ice cream or whatever it is, it's almost like you're catching, catching the rhythm of the season. Or but yeah, it's super fascinating, and very color across culture is so different. It's so important to be aware of the cultural reaction in that society.
And also, I'll just add that looking at those different cultures that you may be unfamiliar with and have to learn
Yeah.
is so inspiring.
Yeah.
It will help you to create great new palettes yourself, because you're going to have this addition of new, interesting information that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, totally, totally.
My mother has a collection, I would say, of about 350 photographs of French shutters.
Oh, yes. I go to France every summer to visit relatives, and I am constantly photographing the shutters and the doors all over France, because those are the accents there that
Right.
stand out and that I love.
Interesting. Yeah, that's
So do the same, everyone.
okay. I was going to say, actually, when I was teaching a class on visual design and UX some years ago with my consulting firm, and one of the things that I noticed, there's a style that's called material design that Google puts out, kind of a style approach, and in teaching, it was material design had just been released. So I was trying to teach it and break it down. And like for designers that work in the field, instead of dealing with theory, they really want, it's like, how do you apply this like immediately? Like, the theory is super interesting, but it's like, what does this mean right now in this particular context or screen or whatever? And I remember looking in the outside world, it's almost like you said, nature, and the physical world. I remember looking at, for example, crosswalks where the street came together as like a big yellow box.
Uh-huh.
And I started noticing this stuff, and then I had also read that the Google team that put together the material design guidelines also gathered their inspiration from nature and from natural. So you can actually see in the physical world and in the social world, obviously in the the retail, whatever, the walking through a city, just outside your house, whatever it is, you can see demarcations of this area is dark, this area has a line around it, this has a sign here, this is an arrow here. All those things are super interesting. They kind of feed into what you were sharing in the presentation. Somebody's, Marco, I guess, asking, what kind of edge do you think someone with color knowledge would gain? How can I use color related skills to differentiate myself? Let's combine that with Fiona's question of how do I start a career as a color consultant?
Well, if you are trained in any design genre, it doesn't matter what it is, having a knowledge of the science of color is absolutely an edge. I see all the time how my knowledge of color has given me an edge, and I've gotten jobs that I wouldn't otherwise. And remember, generally, people are scared of color because they're scared of making the wrong choices.
Mhm.
Even designers, I work with architects all the time. Architects, guess what they use? White, gray, black, red, period, finished, done.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
the standard
And
palette.
it's often because it's a major financial, it could be a major financial decision, like a car company that chooses a color for the season that turns out to be a color that doesn't sell means that there are tons of cars on the lot. So, having a confidence in color on whatever design team you're on can actually have an economic advantage as well as just a visual advantage.
Yeah, and I think we touched on gender earlier, just in passing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I actually think that men and that individuals who have been socialized in a male, socialization are at a disadvantage because men are not socialized with color literacy or with color sampling there are boundaries, and almost the architect thing that you just described, Joanna, is like you're describing most men's like wardrobe, like,
Well, you might add blue in there for the
blue. Yeah, right, exactly. Blue, gray,
dark blue, and charcoal gray.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I think there's both the cultural and the biological at play here there, because actually most color blindness is on the Y chromosome. So very
happens in men.
Yeah. So it's much more common in men. So they're a lot of with more limited color vision. That said, most men do not. And then you have the cultural piece of it in Western culture, because there are if you go to Africa, for example, you see men in
kente cloth and
colors.
Indigo and fabulous colors.
Yeah. So depending on where you're raised, that your colors can be limited as well. And then the fear sets in because you don't know how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I've experienced that in my own work and life. I think absolutely. Like, and I've always envy that women can perceive like certain shades of colors.
Yeah.
Like, I think if I'm just like, how do you, I remember when I was like, how do you know that? How do you get that? And then I would often say, like, ask sort of respectfully ask a female, member of staff or something, like, what is this color? Like, what is, because I know there's an anthropology behind it, that I'm perceiving it as, I don't know, red, but it's really like burgundy or cayenne or cinnamon, or what's the, paprika.
Persimmon.
And actually something that we didn't get to fit into our presentation, but that's really fascinating and part of your whole world as well, is what happens when you name a color.
Right.
So when you name a color, suddenly it becomes visual. We see it in a way that we didn't see it before. So let's take millennial pink, which is basically just like a version of a white skin color, kind of.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of a nothing color. But the second it was named, you spotted it. Oh, that woman is wearing a dress in millennial pink, or what have you. So nomenclature gives us the ability to see things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting, and just totally gets into cognitive science, and which I think a lot of your information there and that you shared is touches upon that, which is kind of perfect for our field, applying this to design problems. You touched upon color blindness with men. It's 10% of the U.S. population, I think. It's the reds and the greens, the Christmas colors. That's another thing, I think, another area. I don't think we talked about it, but it ought to be mentioned, is accessibility. I actually teach an accessibility course on the Interaction Design Foundation. And we talk about color because of contrast. It's the biggest, I think, of all the visual designers that I've managed, and it's a lot over the last 15 years or so, the biggest thing that visual designers seem to have a tolerance for is contrast, low contrast. So they can tolerate a lot of gray on white and gray on gray and black on black, and in user experience work, we're always trying to amplify and make the contrast from an accessibility standpoint okay for people with visual impairments. So that's another reason to get literate about color, is on the disability advocacy side, visual impairment.
Absolutely.
Specifically, and also compliance with accessibility guidelines and legislation. Let's go to Nauman. Are you okay for a few more questions here before we? Yeah, some people have to drop, but if you're watching this later, we've got you for a few more minutes. Nauman's asks if a client, it's kind of what you were talking about earlier, if a client is more biased toward color, which doesn't make any sense, how do you advocate the color you're proposing? So the politics of, because it's so subjective, how do you, navigate someone that says, give me like this and I don't like that? And
psychologically and literally, both ways. So the literal way is, say the client doesn't like red and you have a proposal for something that is red and blue. You keep the red, but you pair it with something else. You make it work with something else, if you feel that it's the red that is right.
You mean if they don't like the blue? Or
you really want the red.
I see. So
you feel the red is right.
So if they're not liking the combination, just switch the combination.
The other part of the combination up.
Right.
So that it will absolutely be a different thing.
Also, something that I've seen you do all the time. Recently, my mom had a client who didn't, quote unquote, like green, like universally. Okay. So the palette that my mom put together, this was for the exterior of a home, had a shutter that was to the green side of a neutral or whatever, but she didn't call it green. And when you looked at it with the rest of the palette, it didn't come across as green. So
because of what it was sitting next to,
right?
As I talked about in the
but she just called. That's the other thing about the naming. She called it something else. Now it was,
and thank goodness so did the paint company, because if I have the swatch and it said Heather Green, I would be in trouble, and the client saw that.
Right. So this is where your manipulation of your client's psychology can come into play.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And I think practically, like what I heard you say is essentially show them different versions and invert their strong push away, and sort of the manipulate the push pull in terms of like, I don't like that. Well, what do you like? Jay had a related question, sort of what are the best ways to use color to differentiate your brand or app from its competitors? Do any examples come to mind? I mean, kind of similar to what we've been saying, but would you add anything to that in terms of,
Well, I think I'm a huge advocate of research across all things. And I think like really understanding your marketplace. I mean, when my mom opened her phone and we looked and we're like, gosh, how many blue apps can you all have? I mean, it's like the whole screen. It's ridiculous. And we were actually commenting with Sunandita about the Logic Capture logo, and it's a very unique purple. The camera that we're using, the logo for the software is this beautiful purple that you really don't see. But it gets back to the question of, do you want something that's totally different? Or do you want something that is really recalling something else and making a little bit of a twist, or even confusing the user. Sometimes people do want to
Yes, they
confuse
do.
the user.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the purpose there becomes super important. But I think if you really do want something different, you have to understand your audience so well to know,
Mhm.
especially with something like an app, like what else is on their phone.
Mhm. Yeah, Snapchat comes to mind, the bright yellow with a ghost. I think it's a ghost or something like that. Like
Yeah.
that bright yellow seems to be something that, and then, I think when they introduced their glasses, they branded it, the machines where you would buy them or whatever. I don't know if they do it anymore, but when they launched them, they sold out.
Yeah. And also TikTok doesn't look
Yeah.
like anything else to me either.
Right. TikTok, right, which is really just kind of like dominating the whole the whole sort of that space of social media, I guess. Spotify is another one. Spotify uses a green, a
Yeah.
very distinct green.
Yeah.
I mean, seen on my tray here, it's popping out at me, Spotify, and
The interesting thing though is like my FaceTime is almost the exact same green. My WhatsApp is almost the same green. However, they look
Blue.
different
The same.
because because
Oh,
Spotify uses it with black.
Right.
And the others are all with white. So that in itself is the differentiator there. It's almost the same green, but it looks different.
Yeah, and it's like, I think that speaks to some of the things you've covered, and and like the contrast, but then also the objective, which we've repeated that a few times because it's so important. Research. There was a question actually about testing, about or at least evaluating. We've got a lot of really good questions here, but there was a question about how do we, is there a way to essentially measure color effectiveness, or the, I guess to get some data on. Let me see if I can find the actual question. Yeah, how do you? It's from Sarah. How do you like to test the response to color? I assume quantitative methods would be preferred to generalize attitudes towards and perceptions of color to a larger user group. So, what are your thoughts on getting feedback, especially if you're in a political situation, especially with a very large brand where it's like, should we go with this purple? Oh, I don't like purple. I do. Well, the boss likes purple. I was actually in this situation, and I was like, hey, I love purple. Just to let you know, I've got a purple tie. I've got, I'm so. But what do you think about measurement of sort of response, like a survey or some sort of tool to get a quantitative view? Would you agree with that? Or
I mean, I think when you're dealing with a huge brand that is, international, that I mean, in a certain sense, based on everything we've said, it's kind of like, well, how are you going to know? I mean, I guess since we know, for example, that yellow is not such a big color in the West, if it's a huge brand here as well, you might stay away from a color that tends to trend at the bottom when people are polled. On the other hand, color makes a statement. So being different can really be an asset, especially based on everything that my mom was talking about, like as you look down at your phone or whatever it is, that being able to spot something can be huge. And this gets to what you were saying about, concept, like what is the idea behind what you're doing? Because if it's something that you want just to be kind of generic and you want as many people to like as possible, you're not going to take a risk. But if it's something that you want, millions, possibly billions of people to want because it's something that's shocking or whatever, like, if you're, then that would be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Lucy asked a question, is there anything such as a safe color? You did talk about, and she's saying, one that would be accepted, or less likely to inspire bad associations. But we talked about the cultural context, the context, the business context. And so I think you covered that one, right? Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah.
Let's take a couple more questions just to wrap up. We didn't talk about ethics, and we should probably touch on ethics, given, that we're in a time where we want to be ethically minded with our designs. I don't know if you know the story about Polaroid. The original Polaroid film was racist. Basically, when you developed it, it didn't recognize Black people in the photograph.
Mhm.
And it almost speaks to that cultural, societal lens that you spoke about in the presentation. So an artificial intelligence and AI algorithm would also need to be inclusive of communities that it was profiling and excluding, and so this is happening. This is still happening. Like there's the famous Google, if you type beautiful Black women or beautiful Black men, you see different results for beautiful white women and beautiful white men. The male ones are really interesting because there's been nothing done on that. So it's like you see the original. Google. This came up, I think, 5 years ago or so. Google changed it, but even up to a few months ago, it's still like an ongoing thing. You still see this type of discrimination being built into the vision of machine learning, right? So now we're into this sort of 21st century problem of how do we make sure that we don't introduce bias into the way the machine perceives and selects and randomizes and then excludes what you might get as a user, right?
I think this, this is an issue that I'm deeply involved in the world of publishing. And I think, this, for designers to have representation of all kinds of designers within design is the best way, of course, to change the problem.
Yes.
Beyond that, if you are a white person designing something, I feel it is your obligation to do this work, to find out where we were just talking about what appeals to a large group of people. Well, who are you polling in that group of people? Are you just polling white people? Are you just polling white people of a certain age? Like, who are you asking about color? I mean, people's reactions to color, like in fashion, for example, can be very different depending, or in the makeup industry, depending on the color of your skin. So what shows and what doesn't show, et cetera, et cetera. So, people in the fashion industry for a long time stayed away from greens because they're not as appealing on white skin, but they're gorgeous on darker color skins or on browner color skins. So there was a bias against these colors only because they weren't as attractive on white skin.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's another thing to be mindful of. I'm just going to finish off here with a couple of lighter questions since we're getting to the end of our time here. And thank you so much for your generous kind of staying after. This is our little after party here on our webinars. We like to, sometimes the conversation is the most interesting part. It's Isabella, and she says, what waves would mantis shrimp see?
What waves?
Waves? I guess she means like light waves. She's saying magic.
Light waves.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
They
Way
see
more than
ultraviolet, and they see all ends of the light spectrum. They have the best eyes in the animal kingdom. Apparently,
we have them in our book.
Let me see if I can.
What is the book? Because we had a question from somebody saying,
"Is mantis shrimp is in there?"
Here's our first book, The Secret. Oops, I'm so
Secret
sorry.
Language of Color.
And we have the amazing mantis shrimp in here.
Yeah.
It's not only that it sees a much wider spectrum, animals. It actually sees in an entirely different way than humans do.
Okay.
And it is so cool. And they, hang on, cephalopods also have this incredible vision. Here we go. Oh, yeah. Here's the beauty.
Wow, straight from the book. How's that answer?
Look at that cephalopod.
Wow.
Look
Look at the
those
eyes. Can you see
eyeballs.
the eyeballs?
Oh yeah, that's insane. There was
Yeah.
a final question from Jacques who said, "You'll have to tell us why cats go crazy for red laser pointer." Joanne, do you have an answer for us on that one?
I don't think it's about red.
It isn't.
It's about the
The
movement.
movement.
Yeah, it's about the
Movement.
light. It's about the light, but not, it could be another color light. And I think the same thing would happen.
Cats don't see red like dogs, so
they're-
it's not the red light.
No.
Okay, so that was a good reminder to not be fooled by your perception of color or
That's
what,
right.
right? And use
Good end. That's a good
research.
end.
And that's our ending. Thank you so much. This has been Joanne and Ariel. And thank you so much for helping us understand color theory and how to apply this to design choices. Thanks everyone who joined us. And
Thank you so
Welcome.
much.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
we will send out a recording right afterwards. Sign up to the newsletter to be informed of future master classes. I'm Frank Spillers. Looking forward to seeing you on a future masterclass. Thanks everyone and have a wonderful day. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye.
Ben and Ariel. Bye-bye.